Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, April 24th. First up, we take a look at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. We see remnants of a gale in the northeastern Gulf of Alaska. Seas down to 19 feet, but previously were 26 feet. Small swell is already in the water, pushing mainly towards the Pacific Northwest, but a little bit towards the U.S. West Coast down here in California. Also, a second gale starting to develop in the western Gulf of Alaska. Seas also at 19 feet, aimed well to the east, and yet pieces of more low-pressure activity suggested off of the coast of Japan and the Kuril Islands. Let's get into the details. First, we take a look at jet stream level winds. These winds, up about 30,000 feet, help support the formation of gales, and when those gales do form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet, just like here. That is, this helps support a counterclockwise flow aloft and also down at the surface, which creates winds, which creates seas, which creates swell once those seas radiate away from the fetch area, and ultimately results in surf. So we start at the jet stream. This is a good indication of what's going on elsewhere in the atmosphere. We have a pretty healthy flow here, not great, but given the time of year, not bad. 150 knot winds pushing off Japan, all relatively consolidated. There's a hint of some sort of a split here just west of the jet stream, but that amount of energy that's bleeding off is pretty minimal. And here to the north in the main flow, I mean, it basically just runs right from 40 north the whole way across the Pacific. A second trough is setting up off of Northern California, not so much supportive of gale development, but maybe for a little pulse of weather moving into the Northern California coast. Let's put this into motion. As we get into Monday, so we have our main trough moving into the Gulf. So actually, the trough that we saw back here is remnants. We saw remnants of a system that was up here. It's going to actually fall down the coast. And then a new system starts developing here, we believe, in the western Gulf of Alaska, aided by the jet stream here with, again, 150 knot winds moving into it. Another little trough, very mild, trying to get going off the Kuril Islands here on Monday. Roll this out. The trough in the western Gulf continues into Tuesday, only it's in the eastern Gulf, and yet another system digs here off the U.S. West Coast into Wednesday and down into Thursday, pushing even into Southern California on Thursday. Interesting, pretty late in the season, but this is becoming kind of a semi-regular pattern. At the same time, yet another trough builds here Thursday towards the date line, but pretty weak, not a lot of wind support in it. It kind of tries to get together. Then we get into Saturday. It organizes better here in the western Gulf, again supporting gale development. And notice here, this is very interesting. The jet moves way far south on Saturday. Roll this out a little bit more. Look at this trough. This is almost, 180 knot winds feeding into it on Sunday in the Gulf of Alaska. Kind of pinched off with a big ridge here ahead of it. But then notice off here, the jet starts falling apart come Monday. That is the 2nd of May. And I suspect that's probably the end of the cycle that we've been in. Now, what's actually going on here, notice the jet is not really split. It's holding together well given the time of year. There is definite signs of an active phase of the MJO in effect. But this sort of suggests that maybe a week out that will start to fall apart. We'll get into that in a minute. Let's go down to the surface, see how the jet is going to affect surface level circulation. So here we go, surface level pressure, surface level winds. As expected, the remnants of the first trough here in the northeastern Gulf of Alaska all but gone. High pressure ridging into the coast here, that high pressure here and low pressure inland, creating a pressure gradient resulting in strong north winds. That is, when you go from high pressure to low pressure in a relatively close distance, creates a lot of wind, and that's why we saw gusts to 40 knot off Pillar Point this afternoon, and all that wind is really just raking the north and central California coast. Anyway, new gale developing here over the date line, and yet another little tiny patch of something off the Kuril Islands. Let's put this into motion. As we get into late Sunday night. Monday, winds start building 45 knots in the western Gulf, moving to the east, and then fading out a bit. Secondary system behind that supposedly develops on Wednesday. Also notice low pressure. We'll put this back into motion, back here. See this kind of we get winds still into Tuesday in California, and then things kind of break up, and there's a hint of low pressure here falling down the coast. That's in association with the trough that we saw over the California coast. Low pressure Thursday, moving into the Gulf of Alaska, and yet more, but see nothing really organized. 30-knot winds didn't get quite cut it. You need 35-knot winds. Another little patch, there we go, come Friday. Now here's a far more interesting system come Saturday in the western Gulf. That's 6 days out. Hard to believe it's for real. 40-knot winds. Certainly good for swell for Hawaii. And look at that, 45, almost 50-knot winds becomes even more unbelievable. But if it were to happen, that would be interesting indeed. And then we'll just roll this out, and we're about there. That system moves to the date line and fades out. So the short of it is, a reasonably active pattern is forecast in the atmosphere. Let's go see what effects those winds will have on the ocean. So here we go. Current significant wave heights, the highest 1/3 waves in the ocean. At any location, 19-foot seas from a previous gale here. Already, as we talked, swell in the water. Probably going to be masked when it moves into California, though, because this is on, 1, the very northern edge of the Central California swell window. 2, lots of north wind expected locally, so there'll be lots of chop here. Whatever swell comes mixed in with that will almost be hard to discern from all the chop. Anyway, roll this out as expected. Gale number 2, Western Gulf, seas building in the 28-foot range, almost 29 feet. This was previously forecast at one point up to 32 feet. But it has fallen down into about the pattern one would expect. 28-foot seas, that's good for probably a 16-second period swell at some point, pushing into the U.S. West Coast, maybe 3 or 4 days out later in the week is what it would look like, just eyeballing it here. That fades out. Another system in the western Gulf, but only 22-foot seas. That's good for 13, maybe 14-second period swell, and sideband energy from both these radiating into Hawaii. That fades out. Another system tries to get going. Won't do anything for the U.S. West Coast, too far away, but maybe a little bit of energy there. This is on Friday. Maybe a little bit for Hawaii, ultimately. Then the system off of the Kurils, North Japan, supposedly with 34-foot seas, mainly 32-foot seas, and whoops, making it just about to the date line before it probably peters out. So still a reasonably active pattern. The active phase of the MJO affecting the jet stream, El Nino affecting the jet stream, so providing a fair amount of swell energy. Relative to the U.S. West Coast, the issue is going to be, will there be winds, and will the winds bury whatever swells result in chop? Way too early to know. And also a quick look down south, because there is something to look at. On Saturday, we're talking just 24 hours ago, a system developed in the southeast Pacific, small area, 30-foot seas. That's not particularly impressive, but notice that it started lifting northeast with seas 40 foot, 41, almost 42 feet, early Sunday morning, late Saturday night, in the Southern California swell window, mainly aimed from, we'll say Mexico down into Peru and ultimately Chile, but still, notice the northward track here. I mean, from, what is that, 50 south up to 40 south in 24 hours. And then from there, it actually made a little bit more progress up to about 37 south and still in the Southern California swell window. So that's a good push to the northeast. And given that it is so far to the north, that shortens the travel distance to Southern California, also shortens the amount of decay, or decreases the amount of decay with less distance, and so more swell will result. So the expectation is by next weekend there should be a nice little push of swell into all of California, but focused mainly on Southern California, and certainly Mexico down into Costa Rica and Peru should do quite well. Anyway, looking out for the rest of the week, another little system here we are watching. It developed, right there, a little push of 30-foot seas. It wasn't much more than that, 31-foot seas on Sunday, targeting Tahiti and also into Hawaii. So maybe a little tiny pulse of 17-second period swell, mainly in the 16-second period range. Then after that, we'll just roll this out. We don't believe that anything else was forecast. We'll just sort of roll it out and check. Notice here's another little system pushing north. That's good for Tahiti, but too weak and too far away for anyone else. And there you go. So a little southern hemi swell is already in the water and pushing north. Let's go look long term. So the El Nino for 2015-2016 is all but over. A rapid transition towards La Nina is occurring. But let's examine this, because we now have more data than we've ever had in previous transitions from El Nino to La Nina. So it's always good to keep up to speed and understand the details of how that transition would occur or is occurring. So first off, surface level winds in the Kelvin wave generation area. That is the area from about 35 east out to the dateline and right on the equator, either side 5 degrees north or south of the equator. You can see a little flag of west winds here, and that's where we're looking. Otherwise, it's trades in control. And then actually looking at anomalies, differences in normal for this time of year, we definitely see a westward push. This is what you'd expect to see during El Nino, also during the active phase of the MJO, and we believe a little bit of both of that is occurring right now, more on the El Nino, less on the active phase of the MJO. But these sort of pushes also feed the jet stream, and as we saw in previous charts, the jet stream is doing reasonably well considering we're practically into May, and the storm track in the North Pacific is reasonably healthy, so this is what's feeding it. And just a quick look back here. So here is the maritime continent, Australia there. Kelvin wave generation area runs from about here, right in this little area. And we can see April 18th, westerly anomalies, and just looking for the past few days, westerly anomalies, if anything, have strengthened. We're probably close to the peak of it right about now. So here's actual winds, surface winds in the Kelvin wave generation area. You see basically it's a trade wind pattern here in the northern part of the Kelvin wave generation area. In the southern Kelvin wave generation area, pretty much neutral. And if we just roll this out, you'll see, if anything, no real change. If anything, trades maybe building in a bit here, easterly trades as we get into Thursday and Friday, but then that sort of fades out. And so still this suggests that El Nino and warm water at the surface out here towards the dateline and even west of the dateline are in control. But what was generating the majority of the westerly winds, and if you notice in the previous images, those westerly anomalies were on the very far eastern edge of the Kelvin wave generation area. That was Tropical Cyclone Amos with winds 90 knots here. This was on Friday night and Saturday near Pago Pago, and that system has since, this is a forecast position and strength, it has decreased significantly today from these targets. But here, when it was back here, it was at 90 knots, and that's pretty impressive. And so here we go. Here's actually a sort of a chronology going back to March, late in March, whole planet from wraparound. Kelvin wave generation area runs from about here down to in this little spot here. As we go down, reds and oranges are westerly anomalies. And here we go. This was, most of these westerly anomalies here are from Tropical Cyclone Amos. But here's the forecast for the next week. If anything, very light westerly anomalies, easterly anomalies almost encroaching in. That would not be unexpected given what we think the transition is heading towards here. And here's yet another way to look at this. Now, the Kelvin wave generation area is up here. Actually, it runs to about 175 right in here, and so it would be right in this box here. But here's Tahiti. Here's low pressure in that area, the remnants of Amos, and we'll just roll this out. You can see low pressure hanging in till about Monday, Tuesday or so. And then notice here comes high pressure building into the Tahiti region come Thursday or so. We think the Southern Oscillation Index will start going positive at that time. and we'll just roll this out a little bit more. And so with all the low pressure that was here we go, right back in low pressure. This is what we think, even though we'll get into it in a minute, there's not really an obvious active phase of the MJO. With low pressure being here, westerly anomalies, that clearly is helping the jet stream and pushing the storm track. Notice as soon, when we go backwards here, as soon as high pressure builds in, recall the previous charts, that the jet stream starts falling apart and splitting a week out. Well, that goes right in sync here with the decay of low pressure over Tahiti. Now, here's another way to look at the MJO, Madden-Julian oscillation. This is the statistic model looking for the presence of outgoing long-wave radiation anomalies. Blues would suggest more clouds, the active phase of the MJO. Reds or yellows, they aren't really here, the inactive phase. And of course, the active phase helps support the jet stream in winter months. This statistic model says we're in a dead neutral pattern and effectively for the next 2 weeks supposed to remain in a dead neutral pattern. The dynamic model suggests exactly the same thing. So it's not picking up on any of this MJO activity that we're talking about, but clearly something is going on to support the jet. And here's phase diagrams that, again, looking like you were looking down on the Earth on the North Pole from the top of the Earth, and you work your way around the planet from the maritime continent, over the dateline, into the West Pacific, over the Hawaiian Islands, and over the Americas, across the Atlantic into Africa, and then on into the Indian Ocean again. And the dot here, the heavy dot, suggests where the active phase of the MJO is, and it basically says it's just, oh, and if you're inside the circle, it's extremely weak. If you're outside the circle, it's strong. So this is suggesting a very weak active phase of the MJO. Just, it doesn't exist, but if anything, it's really somewhere around the maritime continent. Think Indonesia. Maybe it'll make a little push towards the West Pacific, but then it's supposed to collapse. Per this, the ECMF model, the dynamic model here, suggests basically the same thing. No MJO signal, but we sense that something is in fact going on, at least right now, but that will collapse very shortly. And the CFS version 2 model, here we go, 850 millibar winds, going back in time from December. Oranges and red are westerly wind bursts. One there, another one late February, early March. And then right now, here is that little blip of a westerly wind burst that's going on just about over, attributable to low pressure around Tahiti, also attributable to tropical activity in that area. Now we'll overlay the MJO. This suggests inactive, the dotted lines are the inactive MJO, and then moving into some sort of an active MJO, but they're so weak that none of it really is cohesive. So we're just looking here for the presence of westerly anomalies to help fuel the jet, and really the suggestion is after this, it's pretty much over. El Nino decays away, westerly anomalies decay away, and we just go into sort of a slack pattern right here on the dateline, and that's really where we're most concerned with. So with that, it suggests that the MJO attributable to El Nino, or the interaction of the active phase of the MJO and El Nino for this event is all but over, which means the jet stream should go into a quick collapse. Probably not immediately, though, just due to momentum, but down at the surface in the immediate area around there, there's just not going to be anything conducive, probably after about a week out, to support the jet stream in the North Pacific. Now, looking subsurface waters, what we've been seeing here is the 28-degree isotherm, which was working its way off to here, suggesting warm water in the East Pacific. This is the East Pacific. This is the West Pacific. We're looking depth on the equator, cross-section. And what we're seeing is warm water is starting to retreat off to the west and build up over here. In fact, we now see 30-degree temperatures here in the very far West Pacific, and we see a retreat of temperatures here in the East Pacific. During El Nino, warm water sloshes over into the East Pacific. Cooler water, or cooler than normal water, is over here. What we're seeing is a return to a normal pattern. Trades picking up. See, normally what happens is the trades slacken here so the warm water can make its way over here. Now trades are picking up, pushing warm water back to the west normal pattern. Anomalies, differences in normal for this time of year. This is the last little pocket right here of the warm surface waters that was just filling this area, cooking warm back in the fall. 6 degrees, 7 degree anomalies in here. They're all gone. Last little pocket here, again, being pushed by trades blowing off of the Galapagos and Ecuador off to the west, making their way over towards the West Pacific. Last little pool here, and what we see is a subsurface river of cooler than normal water, -3 degrees, big pocket. Consider it almost like a Kelvin wave, a cold Kelvin wave, only it's a river of cold water working its way off to the east, already probably starting to make some surface breaching here in the area of the Galapagos and off Ecuador if you're just looking at this image. The high-res view is even more pronounced, suggesting that cold water is already, in fact, breaching the surface, and that the last of the warm pool is working its way towards the dateline, moving off to the west, pretty much signaling the end of El Nino as we know it. And the upper ocean heat chart, the last Kelvin wave, that is water temperatures in the upper 300 meters of the ocean, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. The last Kelvin wave, I think this was Kelvin wave number 5 in February, dissipated the beginning of April. There's a little gap here, but you can clearly see cold water working its way into about 105 west. I think the Galapagos are somewhere here in the 90 range, and already we're seeing 0 to ½ degree below normal temperatures in this area, and the demise of El Nino is in rapidly occurring. Now back to this chart. We were looking at winds and looking at the arrows, but this is also surface temperatures, actual water temperatures, and you can see temperatures. There's this cool pocket starting to emerge here on the equator in the East Pacific. Differences from normal from this time of year. We're looking at 1 degree, almost 1½ degree negative anomalies here. See, here's the warm pocket that was El Nino, all filling this area. 2.5, 3 degree anomalies in here at the peak. Now, see the trades blowing there, taking the warm water, pushing it off to the west. Cool water, that subsurface cool pool that we saw in the subsurface pictures, starting to breach the surface here. On the high-res imagery here, it's even more pronounced. You can see cool water all along Chile, Peru, the Galapagos, working its way out. I mean, this is just growing rapidly off to the west, now out to 130, almost 135 west. And this is the heart, moving into the heart of the El Nino region. The last of the warm surface water is out here. We've seen this in other charts. It's well depicted here. Still little bits of 1½ to maybe 2 degree anomalies here, but rapidly. And by rapidly, I mean all this has just developed in the past week and a half, 2 weeks, and this out here will probably be gone in another 2 weeks. And here is the trend. The blues are cooling waters, rapidly cooling. This is down to 2.5 degree differences right here, again, off of Peru, Ecuador, over the Galapagos, and well out into the Nino region, which would be right on in here. Rapidly dropping temperatures, warm water working its way here. We had cooler, so this is the trend just in the past 7 days. So temperatures are rapidly cooling here. It's still quite warm here. That warming is basically a wall. Last of the cool water and the trades are taking whatever warm water was here, pushing it off this way, so you get warming in front of that wave, but behind it you get a lot of advection or a lot of upwelling and cooling temperatures. And then here we go, actual sea surface temperature anomalies, and you can see the same pattern. Rapid cooling, below normal, well, 1 degree and below normal, maybe little pockets a little bit more cooler than that. And El Nino, yes, we still have warm temperatures either side of this, but that will all fade out in time. Once this tongue starts developing and getting mature, all the rest of this will follow with it, and then cooling will set in. But still, for the immediate time, there is still a fair amount of warm water here. Certainly that will help give some momentum to the atmosphere, but feeding it anymore, that's already a distant memory. So what's going to happen is whatever's going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere, remember it's a global circulation, it's not going to turn on a dime. This El Nino could be raging August, September time frame, and the atmosphere will still be in the El Nino enhanced jet stream pattern, probably into the December time frame. Which means we could have a pretty good start to the fall in the North Pacific. Also, El Nino enhances the storm track some years pretty well here in the New Zealand corridor, southern hemisphere, so we'll see how that plays out. Now finally, let's talk about how well the atmosphere is coupled or at least influenced by El Nino. Clearly El Nino has been in play. We're not going to beat that one to death. But we're looking at the Southern Oscillation Index here, daily values. And since the end of March, notice negative anomalies suggest at a minimum the active phase of the MJO. This is the differences in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin. So you remember a little while back we were looking at low pressure in the vicinity of Tahiti. That's been driving this index negative, and that's a good thing. And that's what we've been suggesting, that even though the models aren't showing that the active phase of the MJO is in effect, something clearly is happening because the numbers have been quite negative for a long time. The 30-day running average here, it sort of went up here in early April, but it's been in steady decline. Now, this is only through the 21st of April, but we were down to minus 17. Again, this was close to when we saw Cyclone Amos there near Pago Pago, and then the 90-day running average, which you use to look really to monitor El Nino itself, and this suggests that El Nino is still in reasonably good control of the atmosphere, at least for now. And here's the 30-day average, moving average for the Southern Oscillation Index, and you can see the pulses of the active phase, the MJO inactive, when the Southern Oscillation drops negative, and this was really the start of our whole El Nino thing right here. Big massive spike, and then it sort of backed off, and then we started running negative. Notice here's the zero line. We've been in El Nino for we were in 2014 and then went way down in July of 2015. That was about the peak of it. But notice we've had these active phases in January, again in the March time frame, and then here we are in April, almost May, and we're still down at minus 20. That suggests that we are still quite clearly in El Nino territory, and this has clearly shown us that we are in the active phase of the MJO. So the models might not be picking up on it, but atmospherically we're seeing plenty of signs that we are. Another similar index is the ESPI. Instead of measuring surface pressure between Darwin right there and Tahiti, which would be there, this is actual precipitation in these blocks. A positive index suggests El Nino. Clearly we are positive, and if anything, this was down at 0.7 and has been coming up in the past 2 to 3 weeks, suggesting precipitation in this region. And of course with Amos there, that would certainly help to do that. And notice still dryness here in the Darwin area, so that suggests the active phase of the MJO as well, but we believe that is probably short-lived. And finally, the forecast for the Nino 3.4 region, that is actual or projected surface temperatures. We're here into the May time frame. This is still a forecast, but suggests the temperatures are roughly 3/4 of a degree above normal. Let's go take a look. In the Nino 1.2 region, right there by the Galapagos and Peru, as would be expected, we saw temperatures are falling dramatically at minus 1 degree below normal in La Nina territory already, but it's really the Nino 3.4 region out from about 120 west out towards the dateline. Let's go take a look at that. And as we saw on the surface temperature charts, out towards the dateline, temperatures are still warm, a degree above normal. What do we say? 3/4 of a degree per the forecast. So we're somewhere in that ballpark. So here we go. Where we say April, May. I'm sorry. So yeah. So in the April time frame, Yeah, May time frame. I'm sorry, right about half a degree is what's saying here. We're doing better than that right now. It's warmer than that. Anyway, this model suggests temperatures are going to continue to fall. We fall into a La Nina, and we're down to 1 degree below normal, and almost 1.5 degrees by the December time frame. This is actually improved because it was showing us down about 1.9 even a week ago. So the question is, how deep into La Nina will we go? We're hoping not super deep. Because, well, just we don't like La Nina. It's not really good for supporting storm development, not good for supporting rain development. But there is this tendency we've seen, at least in the last El Nino, the 2009-2010 El Nino was followed, of course, by La Nina. But the El Nino pattern held in the upper atmosphere, and so La Nina came into the California region, pushed the jet stream further north, and so it was sort of dipping down the coast, but that brought cold air. So when precipitation came, we had a sort of an enhanced precipitation, and with cold air, copious amounts of snow resulted. I think it was 200% above normal or even more for the Sierras. So that would be another way to mitigate drought. So it's interesting to see how this will play, these water temperatures play with the hangover from El Nino, and whether there's some positive interaction for the two. One, to create surf in the fall time frame for 2016, but also to create enhanced snow for the Sierra also in the winter of 2016-2017. A bit of a guess. Who knows? We'll have to see. So for now, the jet stream looking reasonably healthy. Storm track looking reasonably healthy given the time of year, all aided by what we believe is some form of under-the-radar active phase of the MJO, but the expectation is about a week out that's going to fall apart, and then so will the storm track in the North Pacific, and that will probably be the end of winter. That's not to say that we couldn't get winter swells, but nothing significant. It's definitely in the dying phases. And then the flip side of that is Southern Hemisphere trying to push a little bit to the north here, with one swell expected in by the weekend. So maybe something to tide us over, and then after that, a big unknown. But that's it. So something to ride in the water coming from both the north and the south for California, not so much for Hawaii. The focus is turning more to the Gulf of Alaska. And then long term, well, we'll just have to see how it plays out. Anyway, that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.